So, The Great Carrot Showdown, a study on the egg-laying preferences by female carrot weevils. So, introduction. Carrots are a specialty crop. The definition of a specialty crop is eligible plants must be cultivated or managed and used by people for food, medicinal purposes, or aesthetic gratification to be considered. A little bit of information about carrots. They are an important root vegetable crop worldwide, both economically and nutritionally. They are planted straight into the ground and can be grown year-round. They are part of the Apiaceae family, which also indicates more than 2,500 different plant species, such as celery, parsnip, cilantro, dill. The introduction of fresh-cut baby carrots caused an upsurge in the popularity of carrots in the late 1980s. About two-thirds of the U.S. crop is produced for the fresh market. 94% of the U.S. carrot production is grown in 7 states. I thought this photo showed a nice representation of which states harvest the most carrots. Carrot production can be a profitable market for small-scale farmers and resource-poor growers, as carrots are short-duration crops and higher produce can be obtained per unit area. On top of them being economically important, they also provide a lot of health benefits. Carrots come in a variety shapes, sizes, flavors, and colors. Although hundreds of varieties of carrots exist, most fall into 4 of the main categories. One of the 4 main categories: Imperator, Danvers, Nates, and Chantonnay. Each variety has its preferred growing condition. They are also high in essential nutrients such as beta-carotene, vitamin K, potassium, minerals, and dietary fiber. The first photo shows the size of each category, and then the second one names the parts of the carrot. So you have the petiole, the stem, the crown, and then lastly you have the root, which is the part that we eat. So on to carrot weevils. So unfortunately, the food that is grown for our survival also provides resources for pests to flourish. The scientific name for the carrot weevil is this. I'm really bad at pronouncing it, and I would butcher it really badly. So carrot weevils are a predominant pest in the carrot fields, hence their name. So they are part of the family Cuculionidae. They go through a complete metamorphosis, egg inside pupa adult. Females lay 2 to 4 eggs per egg scar. Mated carrot weevils overwinter in the adult stage, either within host fields or along field margins, and emerge in early spring. They can easily be found during the harvest season on any accessible plant, outside, inside, in the storage units. Carrot weevil damage is highly significant, as these specialty crops are valued at 1.3 billion annually in the U.S. So as for their feeding habits, the adults can feed on the carrot leaves and petioles, preventing the plant from successfully growing and decreasing the quality of life. After they mate, the female will deposit her eggs into the carrot's petioles or near the crown. When the carrots hatch, the larvae will chew through the tissue and head towards the roots. This stage is the most destructive because it causes internal damage, causing the carrot's fitness to decrease. The larvae will move to the next carrot after it's finished. So lastly, the larvae will then pupate into an adult and restart the life cycle. So life cycle visually. So carrot weevils can complete 1 to 2 generations per year. Throughout their life cycle, they are constantly causing damage to the carrot. Adults can be identified by their brown coloration and light brown or copper scales. To identify an egg mass, the first photo, look for an oval black dot which is its anal secretion on the plant. Then you have the eggs. They hatch 1 to 2 weeks. They are usually white at first, but then they turn a dark brown. And then we have the larvae. Larvae go to 4 instars. They are legless, cream-colored, and have a light brown head capsule. They feed on the inside of the plant, making it difficult to scout for signs of damage. Then the larvae will pupate in the soil, and adults emerge in midsummer. So my research question. So luckily, as a growing society, we have come up with solutions to combat these pests. One integrated pest management strategy is to use a resistant but still delicious carrot variety. So for this experiment, we wanted to test if female carrot weevils have an overpositioned variety preference when presented with either Yellowstone, causing purple, Danvers, or resistifly carrot varieties. The first experiment simulated the carrot's natural growth in the fields and focused on the location of where the females laid their eggs in the carrots. And then the second experiment examined if females showed a preference when only presented with a carrot slice on the volatiles of two varieties, Danvers and resistify. For my statistical analysis, I did t-test. A t-test was used to determine if there's any significant difference between the two mean groups and their relationship. Experiment 1 and experiment 2 were both subjected to a t-test with a p-value for significance of less than 0.05. So the methods for experiment 1. First experiment was to determine the overposition preference. Given the 4 varieties, we did a randomized complete block design. These are the material included. The experiment was conducted with carrots that were planted the first full week of July 2022. The adults were reared in the lab and were between 2 weeks to 1 month old. The experiment had 5 replicants. Each replicant group was randomized to have a total of 12 carrots with 2 carrot varieties per pot. So as a visual, each dot represents a carrot variety and each pot is a treatment. So altogether it is 1 replicant. And then each pot, a bamboo stick, was placed in the middle closest to the rim with a mesh bag over the entire pot, and then secured at the bottom with a rubber band. A weigh boat was placed in the middle of the pot between the 2 varieties with a set of one male and 2 females. The experiment ran for 3 days. There were no egg scars present. So then the plants were watered and then checked back after additional 3 days. So then I counted the total number of egg scars, the number of eggs on each carrot. And then lastly, I also measured the crown. I measured from the crown to the tallest leaf tip, and the number of stems were recorded. So then results and discussion for experiment 1. So there was no significant difference in the number of eggs laid for each pair that was compared to one another between all 4 varieties. The pair resistify and Danvers was removed from the comparison because there was 0 presence of egg scars and eggs laid. If we take a look at the figure, trends might indicate that the resistify and Yellowstone had the highest average of eggs laid. However, we can see that the pairs was not significant against each other pairing because of numerical data done in the t-test. Each pair's p-value was greater than 0.05, so we can't say that an individual variety was preferred because there was too much variation and no significant difference between each pair. Reason for no overpositional differences could be a non-preference for varieties, the influence of the variety that they were raised on, mating inconsistencies. So a lot of these factors should be considered in future experiments. So next, there was no significant difference in the number of egg scars for any of the pairs that were compared between all 4 varieties. An egg scar represents a successful overposition attempt by the female, and within that scar, at least 1 egg is found. So variation between varieties for overpositional scarring is most likely the cause for the lack of significance. Like experiment 1, we saw the same pattern. This variation might be due to the mating success of females, age, and the environmental differences like lab temperature, carrot age, life cycle, or previous host preference. So in all my pairwise comparisons, the variation in eggs laid and egg scars was so high, there was no significant difference in any of the varieties. Graph-wise, it might look like there was a difference, but all the p-values were greater than 0.05. We would need to rerun to reduce variation so we can find ways to control those mentioned variables. So methods for experiment 2. So for the second experiment's methods, we examined egg laying and feeding preferences of the female carrot weevil on Danvers and resistify. We did a randomized complete block design. This is the materials needed for this experiment. And then there were 10 replicants. Each replicant group had 1 resistify and 1 Danvers per petri dish. Females and males were separated from the colony and each other and were starved for 24 hours. And then a small carrot rectangle was cut, less than 2 centimeters long and a high of 1 centimeter from each variety, and then each variety had its own style razor, so the surface could be exposed and to prevent contamination from the other variety. So then the petri dish was washed, baked at 100 degrees Celsius for 24 hours, and then ensured that there was no residue from previous experiments. So after cutting and weighing the individual rectangles, I placed them in the petri dish enough apart but not touching the glass. 2 pairs of carrot weevils, 2 males and 2 females, were placed in a weigh boat located in the middle of the carrot varieties. The petri dish was covered with a lid wrapped in parafilm to prevent escaping. After 48 hours, slices were weighed, and then to compare the differences in the amount of feeding. Additionally, the number of egg scars on each slice was recorded. So there were results and discussions for experiment 2. So there was no significant difference in the number of grams of carrot eaten when comparing the 2 varieties versus the fly and Danvers. However, we can examine the number of eggs laid on the same 2 varieties, although not significantly different due to the high number of treatment groups where no eggs were laid. There was a trend towards more eggs laid in the Danvers variety. The number of eggs laid in experiment 2 on these cultivars were less than experiment 1. Again, the high number of replicants with the number of eggs laid indicates more work is needed to understand which conditions a carrot weevil will overposit in the laboratory. Factors like mating success, time since mating, environmental conditions, carrot shape, size, presentation, time of cultivar, all of these are critical to this experiment design. Selecting and raising fertile, mated, or ready to reproduce may also be flawed, and thus a change in methods might reduce variation. This confirms that the experiment should be repeated to decrease variation and control the number of zeros. So limitations in future research. So the carrot weevil used in the study was difficult to work with. There were several potential factors that might have affected the experiment's outcome. So number 1, the age of the weevil. I would consider doing 2 to 3 different age groups, like virgin, 1 to 6 months younger, and then older, 6 months. So insects generally do have a consistent pattern for oviposition. So knowing when peak oviposition occurs would be crucial to understanding oviposition preference. This could help determine which age the weevils might reproduce more or less eggs. 2, the temperature of the laboratory, the light cycle, and lengthening the feeding time. It could be that the laboratory temperature was not ideal to mate. Higher temperatures, like in the fields, could promote carrot weevil mating behavior. The light cycle of the room could be too long or short. In the field, shorter photo periods reduce oviposition, so matching the ideal photo periods rather than one that might be inducing termination of oviposition. So it also could be that the weevils were not given enough time to reproduce or feed long enough on the cultivars. If repeated, increased hour days, 2 weeks. And then 3, increasing the male to female ratio for each treatment group. So by offering more male carrot weevils, the female's mating success could increase as there are more options and competition from the males. So lastly, it could be that the original carrot host the weevils emerged on influenced their adult overpositional preference. So the colony is given the root of the carrot, store-bought and probably a Danvers variety. So this could cause them to have a preference because they already know that this variety is suitable for the offspring. So overall, there was no significant difference between the number of eggs laid, number of overpositioned attempts, and feeding preference in any of the cultivar pairings presented to carrot weevils. So significant additional work is needed to remove variation and understand the reproductive biology and ovipositional preference on this important pest. So this is my reference, and then I want to say thank you to Dr. Long for having me and helping me do this experiment. Also my grad mentor, Emily, that also works with Dr. Long and in the lab.